What do we know about the people who will move? What do they think we need for a good life? Will they come from nearby and speak another language? Will they come from far away and speak our language? When will we become the ones who move? What will we bring with us? How will we greet one another? In the past, what has architecture offered those who move? What could architecture offer them in the future?
After liberation from Japanese colonization in the 1945, the housing shortage in Seoul was exacerbated due to an increase in the number of returning overseas Korean and also from the North Korean refugees. Shortly after, following the outbreak of the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, the situation worsened as one-fifth of the houses were destroyed. In order to recover from the Korean War, government with centralized authoritarian power intensively concentrated in industry, which resulted huge population influx into the city. Seoul has experienced rapid urbanization and intense development during the past half century, resulting in phenomenal economic growth as well as forming an extremely dense residential area. Seoul's population increased from a million in 1953 to 2.5 million, which doubled to 5.5 million in the 1970s and reaching 10 million by the end of the 1980s. National income quadrupled, resulting in expanding the middle class. As such, the expansion of the built-up area and the housing construction was equally phenomenal and fast. This can be conveyed as a more traditional migration due to urbanization in developing countries, where it shows a universal pattern of moving up to places where it is considered to have most opportunities for further education or employment. As a result, more than half of the Koreans' population is concentrated in Seoul and the metropolitan area. Going back to the 1960s, the military regime of General Park Chung-hee, who seized power due to the May 16th military coup, had to produce tangible results of the revolution in a short period of time. The military regime constructed the first high-rise Mapo apartment complex in the middle of the city of Seoul that realizes a modern housing type to maximize propaganda effect. This was a conspicuously effective strategy that responded to the urgent housing shortage problem by introducing a modernist architectural ideology for a new way of living in high-rise apartments. After the Mappa apartment complex was initiated, massive apartment complexes were supplied nationwide. The construction of apartments has constantly intensified, positioning them in a dominant housing type in the early 1990s, exceeding the number of the detached houses. As the traditional extended family shifted into a nuclear family, housing demand increased, as did the preference for the apartment type housing based on the convenient living conditions provided, including the hot water and heating systems and the provision of communal facilities, which appealed to the growing middle class. At present, apartment is the most dominant housing option in Seoul that accounts over 60% among housing types. A French geographer viewed Seoul as the apartment republic, and the government, market, construction industry, and the Korean people all united to construct this high-rise apartment building that are now pervasive across the urban territory. This housing form is so pervasive, it has changed not only the domestic life of the Korean people, but also resulted in frenetic social cultural migration for yearning to live in a more luxurious, exclusive apartment complex by aiming to achieve higher social status. Nowadays, major political issues and social phenomena are all intertwined with apartment issues in the Korean society, which all started from the very first Mapo apartment complex that was constructed from 1962 to 1964. In the 1960s, Korean society experienced political chaos with the April 19th revolution, followed by the collapse of the authoritarian and corrupt Syngman regime that led to the May 16th military coup. the military government pursued ideological modernization and industrialization as a social program driven by the necessity to promote economic development. Introducing an apartment complex was a perfect demonstrational project to transform the military revolution into a life revolution with the social demand for high density development towards efficient use of land and a collective way of life during the process of rapid urbanization and densification. With the Life Revolution slogan, apartment complex came up as a key solution for the housing shortage and real estate speculation, providing political justification, exemplifying the modern lifestyle, and restructuring the overall society by targeting the middle class. The government housing policy goal was officially established from the first five-year economic development plan, which began in 1962 to improve the housing shortage and poor housing environment. The housing supply policy was centered on the development of apartment complexes in urban area and housing improvement in rural areas. In the early stage, there were few construction companies that could provide large-scale housing projects. So the government directly concentrated production capacity through the public enterprises, such as the Korean Housing Corporation, to actively promote the development of large-scale residential complexes. Mapo Apartment was the very first complex project developed by the Korea National Housing Corporation, and it was not a small complex even by today's standards. The site was previously a brick factory by the Mapo prison workshop under the Japanese colonization that was transferred to the Korean government after liberation. For the blueprint of this new housing was a seemingly impossible 10-story high-rise modern living space that shares a strong similarity with the Hilbersheimer's high-rise city. Both are large-scale development that changed the existing urban structure along the modernization of urban space and expresses artificial desolateness between the planned spaces with identical architectural repetitions. The Mappa apartment complex was promoted as a significant establishment of the military government and became a catalyst for the transition from a detached housing-oriented supply towards a completed complex development with high-rise apartment housing. It served as a strong precedent for standardized apartment units stacked into high-rise buildings that are repeatedly arranged within the enclosed domain. Jang Dong-un, the president of the Korea National Housing Corporation, ordered architect Dong-mun to take charge of the planning and designing for the 10-story high apartment complex. Architect Dong-mun actually referred high-rise houses as a future vision for the residential planning. He recognized the inevitable residential transformation to come due to social and cultural changes, innovative architectural structure, modern interior spaces, and envisioned Mapo apartment complex as a utopia with abundant green open spaces and street for cars. Referring to Le Corbusier's Unité Habitation in Marseille in France, Mapo apartment was an experimentation to deploy modernist ideologies of the tower and the park concept by the Korean architects. The perspective rendering of the initially planned 10-story building shows the architect's strong, optimistic ideal for the new future residents. The roof line and the exaggerated horizontal line of the corridor can be read as a symbol of modern architecture. The initial plan of Mapo apartment consists of 11 buildings, including 6 Y-shaped buildings and 2 T-shaped buildings and 3 I-shaped buildings. The buildings were planned as 10-story high-rises, which was extremely rare at the time. There were various obstacles to build this high-rise apartment, as the United States Operation Mission, USOM, preferred constructing refugee shelters over a high-end modern housing and expressed concerns over economic feasibilities and inadequacy of construction processes by looking into the submitted architectural plans that were below the subsistence level. The public opinion was also very skeptical, considering the struggling of the ordinary people at the time, since Mapo apartment was designed to target the upper middle class with central heating system and the modernized drainage facilities. Due to multiple conflicts and considering the practical problems, the buildings were lowered into six-story apartments. And at the end, the Y-shaped buildings were completed in 1962, followed by the I-shaped building construction on the circumference of the complex that was completed in 1964. Initially proposed T-shaped buildings implemented Le Corbusier's ideas of the community garden designed onto the rooftop. However, it was not built at the end due to structural weaknesses. For the apartment building layouts, for instance, the Y-shaped buildings had accommodated commercial and communal amenities on the underground level. On the first floor, apartment units are consecutively lined up along the corridor with an elevated core, including a maintenance office at the center. Each housing unit typical plans are consisted with an entrance, room, kitchen, toilet, living room, bedrooms, and an outdoor balcony. The unit size ranges from 30 to 50 square meter. In the basement, shops such as beauty salon, barber shops, grocery, meat, and rice shops were planned for the residents' convenience. In addition, an independent building was also placed at the entrance of the complex that included management office, hospital, dentist, research institutes, banks, and restaurants. The military government and the architects' ambitious ideal were to create a utopia for the residents by having a well-equipped communal infrastructure all laid in within so that the complex can operate as a self-sustainable community. Vast green open spaces were planned throughout the outdoor space of the apartment complex with some designed parking areas and the playgrounds. The boundary of the Mapo apartment complex was demarcated by installing walls and was only approachable through the single main entrance. These attributes formed a completely different complex territory compared to the surrounding residential fabric of traditional Hanok houses. While detached housing dominated in the 1960s, this completely different exclusive domain of collective apartment buildings emerged instantly. People were shocked at the same time, this revolutionary westernized modern urban residential lifestyle attracted citizens' curiosity. At the time of the first rental announcement for Mapo apartment, applicants did not prefer it as less than 10% of the number of the households applied to give a try living in this apartment building. To live in an unfamiliar modernized high-rise was not easily accepted. The apartment, which had a huge gap between the existing lifestyle and residents from traditional living, had to endure the difference, such as the absence of traditional indoor heating system or outdoor courtyard space, and also integrating toilets into the residential space that was usually located separately outside, which took quite a while to gain public's positive response and acceptance. However, the architects did try to compromise modern and traditional lifestyle into the spatial planning of the households through placing the living room in the center oriented towards the south side. Also, the kitchen and the toilet space were leveled lower with cement finishing so residents can use it with wearing shoes. As time passed, residents were quite satisfied with especially the flushable toilets and the warm water supplied 24/7. Although Korean living were majorly based on the floor, people were getting used to utilizing furnitures like beds, chairs, couches, and tables. In fact, they integrated the sitting and standing culture in a flexible way. Balcony spaces were also a great example where Korean people combined traditional activities such as hanging laundry out into the sun or placed crocks for traditional sauces and condiments or kimchi. Within 10 years, apartment living has transformed from an uneasy and unfamiliar perception to an object of admiration for the middle class. After a century, the apartment has become an everyday living space that majority of Koreans are all too familiar with. Accepting Mapo apartment as a new prevailing housing type and pervasive housing form, and 60 years of dramatic expansion of apartment complexes, which became the most controversial socioeconomic issue of the Korean society. No other architecture or building may replace the presence of apartment in the Korean society. Apartment is the single most influential phenomenon in everyday substance. Apartment complexes have become a common residential type, more or less transformed into an enclosed, self-contained community that include housing, an internal road network, open space, and communal facilities, which all goes back to the starting point of the very first Mapo apartment. Nowadays, apartment complexes are conspicuously becoming more self-contained, gated communities with branding strategies, distinctive landscaping, and luxury amenities. There have been ongoing criticism on the notion that apartment complexes have continuously been a part of public agenda to provide enhanced infrastructure and preferred public space through private developers and purchasing costs by the homeowners. Increasing private exclusiveness of apartment complexes have intensified, resulting in negative consequences such as taking over large territory with conspicuous boundaries that cause discrepancy and incompatibility with the neighboring context, leading to spatial polarization. Despite these negative views on the social cultural consequences of apartment complex building, the apartment complex lifestyle continues its popularity among Korean people. According to an architectural critic, Mapo apartment disappeared and has been reconstructed in long ago in 1994. However, Koreans are still entrapped in this powerful Mapo apartment complex system. People are constantly yearning to move towards higher, more luxurious, and exclusive apartment living that has changed the social norms and the values of domestic life.